From Stabler to Plunkett and Allen to Jacobs, we've got your Raiders covered on Silver and Black today. Here's your host, Scott Culbranson.
I'm so happy.
Welcome back, Silver and Black today.
You found
Little mammoth WVH, Wolfgang Van Halen, bringing us back in. You were with Scott Culbranson, Silver and Black today, always powered by our good friends Sam and Ash, the injury attorneys. You can visit them, samandashlaw.com, because you deserve what's right. Speaking of what's right, did all of the NFL teams get the draft right last year, right? Well, our next guest is Chris Trapasso. He's a writer at CBSSports.com, also the host of the very popular Prospect podcast, which you can listen to and download wherever you get your podcasts. I highly recommend it. He did his 2020 redraft just yesterday, and it changed things up for a lot of the teams. A couple stayed the same, but I wanted to bring him on to talk about the overall redraft and also what he had the Raiders switching up versus what they had done last year, getting, of course, Henry Ruggs and Damon Arnett in the first round. So joining me now is Chris Trapasso. Chris, how you doing today on this Friday, buddy?
I'm doing pretty good. Thanks for having me.
Oh, well, thanks for being on. Okay, so let's kind of set up. So when you think about redrafting, like this to me, I was so fascinated by this because I just don't remember it from last season, and maybe you guys are just doing it, and maybe it was something new that you've done this year, but I love the concept because it kind of brings some insight. But kind of talk about what your guidelines were in doing this redrafting and kind of the thinking behind it.
Yeah, this is actually the third year that I've done it. It's
Great.
basically just as if the NFL draft from 2020 happened today. Like, everything else is still the same, all the transactions, all the trades, but everyone that was picked in the first round, I obviously only do one first round, or one round, which is round one, all those players that were actually picked last April get thrown back in to the pool, and we're setting it up with last year's draft order, and then we're just going to run through, after knowing what we know from rookie seasons in the 2020-2021 season, let those teams redraft. So that's kind of the concept behind it. And it's a fun exercise. It's obviously not incredibly serious, but it is good to kind of take a check at how a lot of these first-year players ultimately performed and how their future looks in the NFL to kind of slot these players back into round one.
Yeah, certainly. No, I think it's a cool concept. I'm sorry that I missed it the previous 2 years, but I loved it. When I read it, I was like, oh, I like this. So we're going to start with some common picks that I just want to go over, and then we'll get to the Raider stuff specifically, since obviously Raider Nation's listening. But at round number one, pick number one, of course, the Bengals last year chose Joe Burrow. Of course, Joe Burrow coming off the national championship game, coming off the cigar smoking picture, all that stuff that made him the kind of poster boy for the first pick in the NFL draft, and the Bengals selected him. But in your redraft, you have them selecting Justin Herbert. I get why, but between those two quarterbacks, when you look at their upside, Justin Herbert, obviously Rookie of the Year and all that stuff, what he did with the Chargers, but why is Justin Herbert, in your mind, a better fit there in Cincinnati if you're redrafting 2020?
Well, I'll say that I did stare at that number one overall pick on my computer for a while, because it was locked in that the Bengals were going to pick Joe Burrow for so long, for a lot of the reasons that you mentioned, that he had such an epic season at LSU, showed so many of the traits that any team would want in their quarterback. But the reason why I ultimately went with Justin Herbert, beyond him winning the Offensive Rookie of the Year, being healthy, obviously, Joe Burrow ending the season on IR with a torn ACL, a pretty serious knee injury early in the season, was that I think in today's NFL, teams need to see growth or flashes from a quarterback when he's a rookie, and there's not a lot of time to wait around. I think if you're Zach Taylor, the Cincinnati Bengals head coach, if you could redraft today, yes, you still love Joe Burrow, and we're taking away anything, experience in the scheme, any of that. I think you have to look at the upside that Justin Herbert showed and the ability to improvise and use his legs behind a Cincinnati Bengals offensive line that is just not very good. So I think, yes, Joe Burrow would still be a top pick, but the injury would kind of scare some teams off a little bit, although we have seen a lot of quarterbacks come back from knee ligament tears and play well. But with the arm strength and the athleticism, those are the key areas that provide more upside when you're looking at Justin Herbert compared to Joe Burrow.
Yeah, that's an interesting take, and I can't disagree with you on that one. Again, we're talking to Chris Trapasso from CBSSports.com, and also he hosts the Prospect Podcast, where you can get anywhere you download your podcast. Of course, pick number 2, Washington football team, Chase Young. You can't argue with that one. That was a great pick, and it worked out pretty good for them. Number 3, the Lions, you had Justin Jefferson. Then you had Tristan Wirfs, the offensive lineman, to the Giants. And then you had Joe Burrow to the Dolphins instead of Tua. And it would be hard to argue that one too, because of knowing that buzz that was around Burrow, and Burrow would fit in that system pretty well too.
Yeah, definitely. And I think if you're thinking about how quickly teams want to see progress from their young quarterbacks, and you're looking at Joe Burrow compared to Justin Herbert, look at the hit in reputation that Tua Tagovailoa took in 8 or 9 games of playing. I mean, he entered the 2020 draft as this mix between Drew Brees and Russell Wilson? Look at everything he did at Alabama. Once he's healthy, he's going to be the guy. He's going to usher in a new era at the position, athleticism, accuracy. Then he plays 8 or 9 games, and only a couple of quarters he looks like a franchise quarterback. Most of the time he's on the field, his lack of mobility, his lack of arm strength, processing speed are all pretty apparent. So I think that's how quickly a reputation for a quarterback, especially a young quarterback, can change. And that's why I had Joe Burrow going to the Dolphins over Tua, even with the injury, because I think those 2 quarterbacks right there are all 3 that went in the first round inside the top 6. We've seen one season from them, and I think almost every team would pick Herbert, then Burrow, then Tua.
Yeah, and you had Tua going at pick 9 to Jacksonville. Of course, they have the quarterback issue too, so that makes a lot of sense. So now we'll get into some of the Raiders pick. At 12, of course, they selected Henry Ruggs. But here in this draft, and I can't argue with this one, knowing as we know what happened to the Raiders down the stretch, you have them taking Cameron Dantzler. Now, going into the draft last year, the conventional wisdom was the Raiders have got to get a number 1 wide receiver. Of course, all 3 were there when they had a choice to pick. Why would they go now with a cornerback instead and go with Dantzler there at number 12?
Well, I think if we're going to stay on the topic of quarterbacks, I mean, Henry Ruggs played well as a rookie, wasn't a high-volume target, but he did make some splash plays, especially in that win over the Kansas City Chiefs in Arrowhead Stadium. But what I find so interesting is that Derek Carr had a career year without Henry Ruggs having some sensational rookie season with, a combination of Darren Waller and Nelson Aguilar and throwing the ball to his running backs. He didn't necessarily need to be buoyed by a, legendary rookie season from a wide receiver. And I think, yes, the Raiders' secondary and defense as a whole was really riddled with injury in 2020, but I still think cornerback is a big need. We'll obviously see what happens with Damon Arnett when he returns from injury in 2021. I think he flashed a little bit and then got hurt, but Cameron Dantzler is a long cornerback, can play on the outside, didn't play well at the beginning of the season for the Vikings, but then did show those ball skills and the length that led to so much production at Mississippi State. So I figured if you're John Gruden and you're Mike Mayock and you're looking at Derek Carr's best season as a pro and you're like, Henry Ruggs wasn't a huge part of that, I think you have to lean corner if there was a redraft today instead of wide receiver.
Yeah, and Dan, listen, Arnett, like you said, he showed some flashes, but there was a lot of red flags coming out of college, out of Ohio State with him, including the fact that he quit football at one point. And from every indication we know, he's a good young man, but at the same time, a lot of folks in the industry felt like he was drafted a little bit too high. And Cam Dantzler, to me, up there at number 12 makes a lot more sense. Then let's skip down to 19. So then you go down to 19, which is where they took Arnett. And here's a guy that I was high on because first of all, my folks went to Southern Illinois, and I went there for a year, so I knew a lot about him because I tracked Saluki football a lot. But Jeremy Chinn, who had a very, very good season in Carolina, this is a guy, with Jonathan Abram back there. They need talent at the safety position, and he can also play that linebacker spot as well, that hybrid position we're starting to see emerge so much in college and the pro football ranks. Talk about Jeremy Chinn and why he would be a good fit there in Vegas.
Well, first off, going into the 2020 draft, I had Jeremy Chinn graded as a first-round pick for a lot of the reasons that you just brought up, that he can play safety, he can play linebacker, he can cover in the slot. Even thinking back to almost a full calendar year ago now, at the Combine, he had a ridiculous performance at 6'3" and 220 pounds, ran in the low 4.4s, jumped 40 inches. He's an extremely explosive athlete and is kind of just scratching the surface of the type of versatile player that he can be at that second and third level of the defense. And I think, yes, next to Jonathan Abram, he would be a tremendous compliment. And again, with these redrafts too, we're thinking the draft is happening today, so the same roster problems, free agents hitting the market apply to all teams. So with Eric Harris set to hit free agency, I think that could be low-key a position that the Raiders will actually prioritize in the 2021 draft. And I think Jeremy Chinn is really, I'm not going to call him Derwin James 2.0, but he is kind of the prototype for that new position in the NFL. Is he a safety? Is he a slot corner? Is he a linebacker? You want someone like that on your team. And if they could ultimately redraft today, I think he would go much higher than he did, which was late in the second round in 2020.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, instead, the Raiders waited last year until the third round, and they grabbed Tanner Muse, who I'm still skeptical on out of Clemson, but we'll see what he can do coming off a toe injury. And Chris, before we let you go, I want to shift gears a little bit because you also did a mock draft. It's mock draft season, so everybody's out with their taking a look at it. And you have a guy that I really like going to the Raiders at 17, of course, and that's Christian Barmore out of Alabama. When you look at the Raiders need on defensive line, it is so glaring. They have Max Crosby, who as a fourth round draft pick has overperformed in his rookie year and had some trouble last year when he didn't have any help, but they need help at defensive end, they need help on the interior, and they need help at linebacker. Why would Barmore be the guy there instead of maybe one of the linebackers or one of the edge rushers if they're available?
Well, because I think he would be the best value selection because he is a pass-rushing defensive tackle. And if you're playing in a division with Patrick Mahomes and with Justin Herbert, and who knows what the Denver Broncos ultimately do at the quarterback spot, wouldn't be surprising if they added an established veteran. You want someone that can get after the quarterback in under 2 seconds. And the guys closest to the football, those defensive tackles, are the guys that can do that. I really liked Maurice Hurst when he was coming out of Michigan in 2018. He's played well. To have someone else that they could rely on to generate push from the inside, I think would help out Max Crosby and Cleveland Ferrell and Arden Key and a lot of those players on the edge where they would be eating double teams on the inside, or there would be a lot more onus from an offensive coordinator standpoint, game planning, if you had someone like Christian Barmore on the inside. I don't think he's quite the prospect that Quinnen Williams was coming out of Alabama, but you know that the Crimson Tide, they're very coached up. They're very strong, a lot of those defensive linemen, and what I like with Barmore, like what I liked with Quinnen Williams, they have pass rushing moves. They're not trying to just win with first step or with power. And we saw in the college football playoff, Christian Barmore against Notre Dame and then against a really good Ohio State offensive line. He was in the backfield, seemed like every other or every third play. So I think that would really have a ripple effect on the rest of the Raiders defense. One of the teams that really needed to add some more pass rush this season finishes like a bottom 10 team in terms of pressure creation rate. If they had him, Maurice Hurst, some of these younger players that they have on their defensive line would be able to pressure the quarterback more, would help the linebackers and help the secondary be a little more aggressive and more opportunistic.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Good stuff. Chris Trapasso, excuse me. You can find him at cbssports.com. Also subscribe to his Prospect podcast. You can follow him on Twitter at Chris Trapasso, Trapasso. Chris, we'll have you on again later on as we approach the NFL New Year. I appreciate you coming on this Friday. All right, there you go. Chris Trapasso from CBS Sports. Good stuff. And I'll tell you what, the redraft is really cool. I don't know how I missed it before, but I'm glad I found it. It just adds a little perspective. And I think you look at that too, as he said, as about to kind of inform what the needs might be going into this 2021 offseason and the draft. Okay, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll get back to your calls. 702-365-9200 is the number. If you were going to redraft 2020 for the Raiders, who would you have taken? Do you agree with Chris? Cam Dantzler, right? Of course, there. I like that pick. All right, we'll come back right after this here on Raider Nation Radio.